Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our fourth FishSounds Educate seminar. And for today, we're taking a break from our more informational seminar format to have a discussion about a potential community-led special issue related to the themes of the seminar series on underwater sounds or some other potential related topics. This discussion will be led by Kieran Cox from the Fish Sounds team, and he's also based at Simon Fraser University. Before I hand it over, please note that the majority of this discussion will be recorded and put on the Fish Sounds YouTube channel for people who weren't able to attend today. But we're hoping that we'll have time towards the end to stop the recording so that if anyone wants to make comments off the official recording, then you'd be free to do so. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kieran.
Thanks, Audrey. All right. I think the kind of modern proverb is, can a screen be shared without a screen said it will be shared? So just to check, everybody can see my screen.
Yep, you're good.
Cool. Okay, so as Audrey mentioned, this is the idea of proposing a special issue on some topic related to underwater acoustics. And, part of this definitely stems from the fact that this community's grown quite rapidly, and these are just obviously a few of the groups involved. And, when I was putting this together, there's countless people and organizations, but the point here is that there's a lot of folks doing really exciting research that really spans kind of the interdisciplinary nature of this work. And, our role at Fish Sounds is pretty straightforward in that, our mandate is basically just to showcase research, right? That's what we do. We've built cyber infrastructure for highlighting the work that other folks are doing. And so, kind of with that same idea, something like a special issue seems quite possible. So for folks who kind of maybe aren't totally aware, but just as a reminder, a special issue is just a issue of a journal that focuses on a topic that is broadly applicable and somewhat focused in its nature, and it falls within the journal's scope. The proposed example or the proposed benefits of this are pretty far-ranging. I do try to find some data quantifying it. It seems to be a little bit debatable, but certainly I can say that there's a advantage to a focused exploration. It can have really kind of timely coverage as topics are emerging. It's a great way to collaborate and meet other folks, especially if we're working across the globe. And I don't know if this is the case. I couldn't find any data on it, but one thing I think a lot about is the fact that there's just an ever increasing number of publications every year. I've always found this really challenging in terms of locating research, right? It's kind of like a standing out in the noise, so to speak. And so with that, when I see these kind of issues come out, they're always a really good way to consolidate information. And so I'm hoping that this emerges as a theme in the future because if the case, it would be a great way to focus our efforts and put things all in kind of the same place for readers. Now, many journals run special issues. These are just a few that I think folks will know. This can be targeted issues, this can be open calls. There's many different formats here, and we'll talk about them in a little bit more detail. But I think as we talk about this from a community-led perspective, I would say that, I'm personally not attached to a specific journal. If folks have a preference, I think there's pluses and minuses to any kind of outlet. But I do think that you can kind of broadly define this as kind of a fork in the road when you consider options, right? And there's kind of a immediate split, which has different hurdles. One being money, the other would being a somewhat higher bar in terms of getting the special issue accepted by the editors of that journal. When we think about the journals that I just listed, I think folks are well aware that some journals like Frontiers and MDPI are more of a pay-to-play model. And I'm certainly not trying to diminish any of the research published in these journals. They're great journals. I've published in them personally. But I think everybody can agree that the plus $3,000 fee that can come up with acceptance can be a little bit of a barrier when you're thinking about submitting for that type of a publication. The other route has somewhat of a higher bar in terms of the editorial team saying yes or no to your special issue, uh, but there's less fees associated with it. Now, kind of the nature of research means that if we are going to consider this, we do have the option to first aim for a somewhat higher bar target that would alleviate publication costs. If rejected, turn around and approach another journal. So I don't think this takes anything off the table, but it does mean that if we want to consider some options, we can kind of think about this in terms of what the cost to entry would be. And so that kind of poses the first discussion question, and we're not going to jump into this right now. What we'll do is, as I work through this, we'll kind of fill out the questions I think we should discuss today, and they'll come back at the end, and we can jump into them. So the first one is a target journal. Now, regardless of the journal we're going to target, many of them have published special issues that are relevant to the work that we're doing. So these are just an example from each of the journals that I've mentioned. And, I think we're all well aware that, these have been great consolidations of research and really exciting to see from a very specific standpoint on a given topic. So there was one in Marine Pollution Bulletin, which, as a PhD student, I read in great detail, which focused specifically on marine policy or sorry, this was in, on marine policy and kind of adaptation within Canadian waters, as an example. Now, when talking to folks, one of the journals that consistently emerges, though, is definitely Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. This is for several reasons, but certainly it's because they publish very high quality research within the life sciences. They allow for guest editors, and the issues create this very original and authoritative synthesis. I think this is part of their high bar, but it is certainly, it's the journal that I think people are consistently flagging when we talk about this topic. Now, it does, as a result, set a standard that it has to be high quality research, but luckily there's a range of things that can be included in this. So this can be what we consider kind of original data. It can be in a review, opinion piece, perspectives, and all of these things can fit within this journal, which is great. Here's some examples of ones that I thought were kind of idea provoking from the journal in the last couple of years. So this is ranging from, evolution through to reflections on decades of research. Kind of neat from a sound perspective in that regard is, 40 years is obviously quite a long time, but when you look at some of the timelines of soundscape research, it's quite of a difference there. Um, a journal or an issue that came out recently is on insect biodiversity monitoring, which I saw several soundscape folks have published in. And then they actually have a relatively recent issue on the power of sound. Now, I did see this and have some concerns for novelty of a proposed issue, but kind of with the classic acoustics approach, this is a terrestrial topic. And so I think it does allow us to kind of point to the value of underwater acoustics if we wanted to go this route. The point here really, though, is that these topics are focused in some regard, but they inherently have an interdisciplinary nature to their exploration of a topic. So I think that means many folks working on a range of topics could be included within this. Now, because of this high bar, they do only publish 24 issues a year. These are all special issues. So very competitive and quite prestigious for folks that are really concerned about impact factor. As a result, yes, they have quite a high impact factor. They have a schedule for proposing these issues, which is 3 times per year. And I put the two most relevant ones here. And so this is the idea that you're putting forwards a proposal for a special issue in either April or July, and you get a decision several months later. Now, one of the main benefits about this journal is that there are no mandatory publication fees, and all papers are made open access within 1 year after publication. Authors would have the ability to pay for immediate open access if that's of interest to them, but a decision by one group of authors is not a decision for everyone. And so it really allows us to kind of all navigate that as we see fit. An issue can take up to 14 months after a proposal has been accepted. So an idea of a timeline would be that if the proposal is accepted in June, manuscripts would be due in October, and they'd be published around April to August. So quite a long time period, but I think one thing that's important when you go through this process is to be really honest about the time it's going to take to get a paper ready. I think I don't know. I'll just be honest. I think I always have papers in prep that I think are going to come out very soon. And, the reality is year later, they haven't made a lot of movement. And so, in some regards, when you think about what you might want to submit to this or what topics would be relevant, the perfect paper is one that kind of has shape or, you've been working on for a while and you're not rushing to try to get out because that really positions you well to get it to all your co-authors and have it be in the kind of best shape possible for submission because I don't think in this case, it being a special issue at all influences the quality of the reviews. I'd say, if anything, the reverse, given the caliber of the journal. So, if this, but really for any of the journals we consider, is of interest, there's going to be a pre-submission inquiry process. And this is just where we're going to summarize the topic. We're going to outline why it is timely, the importance of the issue, its novelty, its impact for the field, these kind of topics. And then in the case of this journal, they'd like a list of potential collaborators with either the subject areas or the titles. Really just a list of the folks and the names of the papers is perfect. And this case, it goes in as an email to the editors for their consideration. If it's not encouraged by the editorial board, which, I think we're all fairly well versed in rejection at this point, that's totally fine because, good news, there's many other great journals in the world, and we'd have the option to target them with the effort that we've put in. If it is encouraged by the editorial board, then we can confirm the authorship of everybody involved before we submit a formal proposal, which then goes for peer review and assessment. They recommend that the issue should have about, over 14 or so papers, with the perfect number being 14 to 18. And it should really be on emerging interdisciplinary subject. And they've highlighted that, so I'm highlighting that. And I think this is neat because this is a really cool aspect of underwater acoustics. Folks are coming at this from a conservation perspective. They're thinking about it from a data management perspective. There's a lot of topics in here already. So I think it's just kind of embedded in our field, which is great. The main aim is to have it be novel contributions to the field. And again, as I mentioned, a mix of research types. So these are original articles, reviews, opinion pieces, perspective, theories. They can kind of all fit in here, but they do recommend that there's about 50% original articles and then 50% of the other type as a kind of general outline. One aspect of this is there are guest editors. And so these are folks, these are 3 to 6 folks, seems to be the number that is consistent, who are going to manage the content, the peer review process, and they also write an introductory article about the issue in general. Guest editors can lead or be the final author on only one paper and the author on another. That doesn't include the introductory article, but it does mean that if you're from a working group or you have several folks that are going to be putting in papers, you do have to have a discussion about who's on what papers you're going to submit. I think initially this seems like quite a concern because everybody, again, as I mentioned, feels like their papers are going to be ready right away. And then when you get closer to the date, it's not always the case. So I've never really seen this create conflict, but it is worth being aware of. The guest editor's contributions to the field are considered during submission. Now, this is not meant to say that they can only be big names with great publication records. They actually say the reverse. They say if it's going to be a lot of junior authors, then we're just going to provide additional support. But still, I think it means that if we're considering who might want to be a guest editor of this, we should try to have a range of people who have experience with these kind of stuff before and those who'd like to learn more about it. Authors in the issue can only be involved in two papers. So same number as a guest editor, but with the exception of that introductory chapter, which is really just the framing of the issue itself. So it's a, high level summary of what the aims are. I'm sure some of you folks have seen these papers. So, that kind of brings us to our second discussion question, which is, guest editors. This is something we don't have to totally nail down today, but if anybody does, immediately want to be interested in this or they have some great suggestions, we'll try to build up an editor team of about, yeah, 3 to 5 people to work on this. And, let's be really honest, this can be quite a bit of work. I think a lot of people who have done this role say it's great, but it also becomes a lot of time reviewing papers, chasing down folks on email and these kind of things. And so I think some people love that type of work. And for some people, there's the happy middle ground of, I'd love to be involved, but I don't need more emails to answer. If you're thinking about this being something of interest, then the needs as we move through it are pretty straightforward until the manuscript is due, which is just a tentative title, a list of everybody involved, what type of paper you'd want to submit, and an abstract. And we really only need the first two for the pre-submission inquiry, and those are not something you're committed to completely. We can go through this process, determine if the editors are going to support the issue, and then finalize things with people. So you do have the option to change your paper or, drop out or add folks at the last minute kind of thing, especially as we move towards the submission of our formal proposal. Eventually, we will need the abstract, and they are focused on diversity of their issues, which is great. And so we would need the lead author's gender, their current location, and their career stage. And the aim here is to just try to balance it across these various groups and locations and make sure many folks are represented. I also, again, think this is a great advantage for the bioacoustics community because people are spread everywhere. There's folks that are emerging, there's folks that are more senior. And so I think this will be a neat aspect of anything we put together. So we've thought about this a lot, and I was trying to come up with a topic. And initially, when I was thinking about it, I kind of saw it as something like this, right? We have this history of the field, and then we have the kind of like emerging space today. And maybe it's one or the other, or somewhere in between. And I was really seeing it as a very like continual kind of linear process is where we would try to target an issue. I now certainly will admit that's kind of not a great thinking given the complexity of the field and the options that we could explore. And so let's just say my thinking on this is very open-ended at this point, and I would really keen to see kind of a range of suggestions put forwards for what the topic could be. Some broad ones that I thought about, and certainly things that I think a lot about within my own research. So I don't want to bias this at all. We don't have to go into any direction that I'm a fan of. But I do think it's important to consider how we can conserve ocean soundscapes in a noisy and ever-changing world. Now, right away, we want to be really cautious of terms. So ocean soundscapes here does exclude the aquatic folks. So we can change that. I think we kind of want to think a lot about the specific terms and what we want to consider. I think there's also a lot of focus in this group for kind of achieving a holistic understanding of aquatic soundscapes. Now, these are somewhat similar, but when we break them down, they are going to have a different focus. One's going to have more probably noise pollution, changing ocean conditions, climate change, changing social landscapes. The other one's going to be describing, the vast number of sounds in the ocean. So we can talk more about this because I think it's really important, but it is worth considering in detail uh, how we're going to land on something that really fits what people want to contribute, is really at the forefront of the field and very novel. There is also the option, obviously, to fit the papers to the issue or fit the issues to the papers. So we could go through this process and see what folks have to put forwards, what they want to talk about, and then kind of build the issue around that as well, which I'm certainly not opposed to. I think a cart before the horse or horse before the cart approach works well. And so really that brings us to kind of our third and where we'll land for the discussion today, which is the special issue topic. And so I know that was very brief, but it is very brief because we're going to be kind of talking about this as a community. If there's interest, we can move forwards on it. If there's not, we can keep submitting to journals on our own accord. So yeah, let's dive in and see if folks are interested. And if they are, we'll move forwards with kind of some of the initial stages. As Audrey mentioned at the beginning, I believe we will have some discussion that's on YouTube for the recording and some that's not. And this is just because not everybody's comfortable with their questions or their faces and these things being archived on the internet forever. So let's talk initially. And if you want to not be recorded, we'll make that transition very clear for folks. Okay. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, hi, Kieran. Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it sounds great. I'm just starting a PhD student, working on marine soundscapes, and so I don't really have anything ready yet. But maybe within 6 months or so, could definitely offer something. And I think maybe for the moment, like you say, fitting the papers to the topic is a better option. I would support that, and I think maybe keeping it open as maybe just like underwater or aquatic for the moment, just to include as many papers as possible. I think the worlds really do align, and there's not a specific need right now to separate, marine and freshwater, or at least I don't see it like that at this stage. Maybe if I mean, on the other hand, I suppose if you did have it open like that, it might be almost create the requisite to have like half the papers on freshwater and half on marine, which could be a problem depending on, what kind of papers you have. So I suppose maybe see what the papers are and then go to the decide the theme afterwards. I think that's definitely the way forward. Yeah, I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, so a quick note on the timeline because I think that is an important one. There are submission due dates. The difference between the two that are coming up does create quite a stark contrast in timelines for finishing up research. At Fish Sounds in general, like we're fairly big fans of the idea of not creating false urgency in academia. This is something that runs our lives no matter what. It's not useful. So if the view of the community is that more time to work on this is needed, we aim for a later date. That's certainly okay with me. A deadline can be motivating, but we don't want to stress anybody out. I do think you're right about or certainly I think you're right about the marine versus aquatic. Let's keep that open initially. And no matter what we do in this, I was thinking about this in terms of how we would frame some sort of opening topic on this. I kind of really see it wherever we land as a topic, we can kind of put it into blocks because of the way the field works. So let's say we do go with something related to um, conserving soundscapes in a noisy and ever-changing world, right? Or aquatic soundscapes. That can really be broken down into kind of like emerging technologies, like lower order taxa, changing climate conditions, policy. That can be broken up quite nicely in a way that I think will fit everybody. And so I think there's something there as well where no matter what we land, it would be great if this could be open to anybody. And then once we've decided that, it's not going to be limited to folks that have come to this or folks that are associated with this group at all or anything like that. We'll broadcast it out. So we'll put it on the Fish Sounds website. We'll put it out on Twitter and we'll try to attract papers from various people to kind of fill that out. So yeah, I think all your points are great, basically.
Okay, cool. Good to know that there could be some flexibility in the dates.
Oh, sorry, there's some questions in the chat. Yeah, sorry, the 14 and 16 papers or 14 to 18 papers is for the issue. So the aim would be to design an issue and then ultimately have 14 to 18 papers submitted to it. They say that's, a rough estimate, but seems to work well.
Hi, Kieran. Well, thank you for the presentation. I think my thoughts are, yeah, maybe making a call for like which papers would be of interest. I think that would give a better idea of like, what are people really thinking of? Because I'm thinking if you do go into the like doing it in terms of more like anthropogenic stressors or whatever, I think that could potentially, I mean, I think that's kind of an important break in terms of people just kind of exploring new, like new soundscapes that there's necessarily not an anthropogenic force that you are studying. So maybe, when once like there's a call for like, okay, what if you are interested in this, what type of papers you would be interested in submitting? Maybe that could be a good way to decide. It's like, okay, is there enough breadth of like and a stressor or there's like other papers that are just like pushing the boundaries in other terms, without a specific stressor on mind in mind. So I don't know if that would be easier to figure out once maybe there's a call for like if you're interested in this, what type of paper, like what would be the title or like why would you be submitting?
Yeah, and great to see you, by the way. Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's in some regards what I liked about the idea of something focused more on a holistic understanding of aquatic soundscapes, which was in that you can have anthropogenic sound or anthropogenic noise, but then you can also have, fish biodiversity, untapped ecosystems, deep sea, fresh water. You can really block that up into the thinking that folks are doing. Um, I work quite a bit on noise pollution, but I certainly don't want to see this be a special issue on noise pollution. I think that's just too focused initially. So, yeah, I think your point's a great one for kind of building up some themes within that. But I think, yeah, leaning towards more something that can catch everybody or at least many aspects of this work would be great because, yeah, 14 papers on noise pollution is not, I would say, needed. And I work on noise pollution, but like, that's too narrow already. So let's keep it broader.
I'll just point out that there was a question in the chat, in case people aren't seeing it, whether for someone who arrived late, whether the main focus would be to focus on biogenic underwater noise or other topics like noise pollution management, to which I responded, we haven't settled on either yet, and to which they responded, if there is agreement into including URN management experiences like ours, then they would be happy to join. Yeah, so this is part of what Kieran's getting at is, yeah, we don't want to necessarily be the main ones driving this conversation. And so we are interested in getting feedback onto what people think would be the most interesting or useful, or think could be considered a more like substantial contribution to the field. And so that's part of what we're hoping to get out of this discussion.
Yeah, and personally, I'd be really interested. I think I've got the right question in the chat here. The Quiet Sound Project, for folks who are more international, and the Echo Project in BC is work that's being done here in uh, Canada and the US and the Pacific. That's a great example of management and policy intersections within acoustics. And so examples like that, I think, are really important for yeah, creating a picture that is very holistic in terms of what the field is working on, where things are going. I think this is probably one of the most interesting aspects of underwater soundscapes to date, right? How do we do this across borders in relation to endangered species with multiple stressors already in the landscape? So I think policy, anything that we can do to keep the policy door open for these types of discussions would be, yeah, would be really useful. Okay, cool.
There
There's a
was,
question. Yeah.
oh,
Audrey, do you want to read that?
Sure. So someone asked, since noise pollution is too specific, could we instead do noise effects? Then we could get papers such as how noise of one species affects another, or how storms affect a species on top of noise pollution papers. So it seems like talking about more along the lines of like biological sounds and how they affect other species, as well as anthropogenic sounds or, yeah, environmental sounds, but focusing more on the effect side of things.
Yeah, cool. Interactions of soundscapes. I like that. I think, probably where this is going, which I think would be good, is if folks do seem generally interested in this idea, um, based on whatever we chat about today, I think something will kind of start to emerge, and we can then put out kind of a document outline, themes, I would say, within an issue with a very kind of broad topic and send that around. And that would not be fixed in stone, right? That'll be like a live document people can comment on and change. And so certainly don't see it going in a direction that maybe doesn't align with your work as a indication we don't want it to align with your work. We can tweak things, but I think, these points right now for management, other types of soundscapes and their interactions, these kind of themes would flesh out extremely well for various sections under kind of a broad heading.
There was an additional suggestion about soundscapes slash bioacoustics for conservation. So this would be broadening it out a bit more and just, yeah, it's seemingly pairing the topics of soundscapes with interest in conservation, if I'm hopefully translating that correctly. I see nods, so thank you as another suggestion. So if I could add, it seems like a lot of the interest from the comments we've had so far is focused more on the conservation impacts and effects angle, which I think even if, yeah, that broad interest in direction is of interest, that's really valuable to know and could help guide the discussion. Um, just to throw in, there are other options related to more generally describing soundscapes, like Kieran mentioned, or doing other types of applications more related to passive acoustic monitoring. And so those are like other broader themes of different angles, in contrast to the ones that seem to be coming up. And so if, yeah, there's interest in that too, then that's valuable to know. But if we really like the conservation angle as it seems to be coming up, then that's also good to know, if that makes sense. There was another comment in the chat. I think it shouldn't discard soundscape studies that focus more on sound parameters and physical properties rather than strongly related to conservation and policy. Okay. So yeah, that was kind of what I was opposing in case there were any points towards that interest, as that would broaden it up in a different way.
Can I ask you a question about that to folks who work on this topic from more, maybe let's not maybe call it natural history, but from a descriptive standpoint? In some regards, that is biodiversity monitoring, ecosystem monitoring, these kind of topics. And so, if the focus is on conservation and there's a section for monitoring soundscapes, monitoring coniferous species, describing these species, like these types of topics, do folks think that would fit well, or should we keep it kind of really broad at the insert?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it could be well fit towards it, but you just have to, so how you word it, how you explain it, it depends. So, I mean, if you've got a paper that's strictly looking at the physical properties of sound, you can obviously extrapolate it to conservation, but that's just how it's worded, what the conclusions are like that are drawn from the paper. I think these are questions that have answers that you will see once you have actual directions for the papers. Um, but it could definitely be done. I suppose it depends on it does narrow it down slightly, but I suppose it could still work. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, and I certainly don't want people to have to frame their papers from a direction that doesn't seem natural with the fit. But when I think about like conserving a soundscape or yeah, some like from the conservation perspective, the foundational tools in there are the ones that are describing the species, cataloging them, describing the ecosystem. That's really the foundation of it. And so I think there's a way to frame kind of where the field is there or some examples of it or applications in, if it's 14-ish papers, it means that with any theme, there's going to be kind of 3 to 5 subsections in that there'll be a few papers. And so I certainly see kind of monitoring, so to speak, as one of those if it's conservation focused. But again, I'm not attached to this thinking.
There was another good comment in the chat pointing out that we want to also make sure we're not replicating efforts if possible, pointing to the effects of effects of noise on aquatic life conference, as well as their regular book publications, of which there will be another one this year in associate or like coming out in the next year in association with the conference that'll be held this summer. So I think some of the comments that have come up related to broadening it beyond just noise pollution would help differentiate us from their efforts, so we could still touch on topics like noise pollution as a subset potentially.
Yeah, I think many folks will be at that conference. This was actually something
Yeah.
I thought a lot about because when you look at this, there's been several special issues on this topic already, and they're very good. They're put together by fantastic folks in the field, and so I think there is that you need to pin your issue in a place that is kind of unique and really does have a scope to it and a focus and a novelty as a result and can summarize a broad topic in a fairly focused way. But then you don't want to exclude folks. So I kind of went back and forth on this when I was thinking about titles and potential topics, which is like, yeah, you do need to state like, is this, the forefront of the topic? Is it the history of the topic? Is it novel applications? Like there's somewhat focused in that regard. And so I do think that is something we'll have to be critical of as we go forwards. Just to kind of like continually reiterate, like, okay, is this seeming like it's going to be a standalone product that in 14 papers we can really kind of like put together a foundation for that type of thinking?
There was another comment in the chat suggesting just like also focusing on sorry to summarize, try to summarize the message, but summarizing the history and the evolving understanding of how the use of sound has evolved over the last billions of years is coming more into focus, and also how the industrialization on the ocean is disrupting this biological advance. So that would be more of an evolutionary angle on the effects of noise, which is quite cool, I think. And then also the comment that there are no lack of complex topics to explore in this inquiry. And just for anyone who is joining late, because I've seen a couple comments related to that, we're mostly hoping today to explore potential themes and gauge general interest in the idea of a community-led special issue, most broadly on something to do with underwater sounds. And we're trying to pin down themes that are maybe of the most interest to folks, or any comments or thoughts people might have around the idea of this special issue as well.
The timeline comment is great. So this is something I thought this was my initial thinking was like an issue on the kind of history through to forefront would be really neat. It's a bit broad in some regards, but you think a lot about those kind of depictions. And I think a neat aspect of I've noticed about this field is that many of the people who have been working in this system for decades are, still here, still really active. And so those are perspectives that like as an emerging researcher, I'm always keen to hear. And so you could kind of build a really neat timeline and just have people put in perspectives on how things have changed or where we think the forefront is or emerging topics and kind of fill that out as well. So I think we could just take a kind of temporal focus to the research as a way to kind of stamp it within some themes. But again, that could live within another topic as well. Right? A single person can write a review article on any of the topics we've discussed from the history to now perspective, which would be a great contribution.
I had put this in the chat because there was a lot of interest in like bioacoustics for conservation, and we're constantly talking about this in our lab. That's of interest to a lot of people, the management, the policy. We're all doing this because we want to protect and conserve the species we work with, but a lot of bioacousticians are just the scientists that collect the data, analyze the data. Most of the research will eventually be used for policy and conservation, but that's not most people's role because they're just the scientists. No shade, I'm just the scientist as well. So we just have to be careful with that statement because we don't want to exclude papers that are aiding towards conservation as well. We can talk about how this work could be used towards conservation, or talk about how I believe, Kieran, you were saying about the importance of certain key species is still important. I'm wording this so terribly, but just like we need to make sure we keep it broad enough that you don't just have to write a paper if your work like helped save a species. It can be more of like a case study, or here's what I did and why this could aid conservation.
Yeah, I was going to chime in before that, like something that just kind of tells the story of how much is involved in getting to the point where policy can be written. It's certainly like I'm an outsider of the field. I work in tech, but yeah, like I feel anything that kind of laid that out would be useful both to people in the field, but also anyone who's trying to dive into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both would be really interesting. So I think the papers that from a conservation perspective, and I don't think this is certainly isn't unique to bioacoustics or ecoacoustics or any type of acoustics, but bridging the policy gap and understanding the policy windows and really kind of like the outline for okay, you're a marine biologist or other related discipline and you're interested in forming policy, but what does that specifically look like and how do you do that and how does that work? And that's why when the Echo program and Quiet Sounds came up, I got kind of excited about a policy angle, which was those are the folks that are taking the data and going to talk about it in boardrooms where species aren't present and they're moving that. And I don't think every person has to do everything in their research. I think it's kind of impossible. So a section on monitoring, describing kind of natural history is great. And then a section on policy, like where are the international policy windows right now for this space? I know several of them in Canada, a little bit less in the States. But how are, where are these kind of things building? We know there's momentum building in this. We're having international discussions on noise. There's commitments to biodiversity targets and pollutants. But as a biologist, these things are still kind of a black box for me. And so I think, like, yeah, pulling in folks from multiple perspectives, be it a case study, this is what has happened in these specific waters, or this is what, I think could happen internationally. All of those can fit in either side of that.
I would extend that to even just papers on new passive acoustic monitoring rigs, things like that, that are both necessary to determine like thresholds to set in policy, but then also to track whether or not those policies are being followed.
Policies being followed. Yes, isn't that the goal? Um, no, but I think you're right, and I think that's probably something we'll determine when if we put this together and we see what folks are interested in is kind of if there's going to be an emerging tech element of this. This is a very unique aspect to the field, so I think we can. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if people have those types of papers they'd like to contribute. But yeah, I think kind of certainly Sarah, to your point, anything on the kind of tracking the issue, moving the issue, bridging that kind of, okay, you have the data, now we want to think about how it's going to be used. That's the part that I think is actually the hardest for biologists, certainly. I don't know about the policy folks, but that's the part that I struggle the most with. Like, I had someone who works in policy explain policy windows to me one time, and I was like writing notes on a plane because it's just like we're not trained to do this, and it's how you conserve species, right? It's done in legislation, it's done in specific words, and so anything we can do to make that more clear would be great.
A similar thing could maybe be said to translating bioacoustics to other ecologists or biologists as well, as I often have those conversations. And whether that would fit into the special issue or not, it could be at least something that we're thinking about as well. You also gotta love it to Kieran in the chat.
I saw that. Yeah, thank you.
Um, so, oh, go ahead.
I was just defining like a temporal and or geographic limitation on anything that we're looking at. Like, is it a global thing, or do we want something that contrasts what's going on in different countries, things like that, or do we want to constrain it in any way? Might be other things to put into the call.
Yeah, so I think the focus inherently with this journal, and sorry, the gentleman from the Quiet Sounds is leaving right now, but I'm actually giving a talk to that group in 10 days, so I'll follow up with him then. Which is yeah, that's coming up quick. I think inherently with this journal, the aim is to have it be an international effort from a range of countries. And so, they literally report this. So one of the things the editorial team will comment is if you have a good spread from all over the world in terms of where your authors are. So yeah, I think we're gonna generally aim for a kind of global paper, but I don't think that limits people working in specific areas. So if, not all these papers need to be available data that spans the globe. Let's keep it case studies, perspectives, reviews, but aim to have an authorship that kind of represents how diverse this community is.
There was some agreement in the chat with that. So with that, as we're getting to the last 10 minutes, if it's all right with everyone, I might wrap up the recording now, give a little spiel, and then we'll still have time for any comments from folks who don't want to be recorded, if that sounds okay. Yes, okay, great. So this will conclude the recorded portion of this discussion. We'll have our next FishSounds Educate seminar in 2 weeks by Ashley Lillis, who will be talking about invertebrate sounds, returning more to that informational seminar format again. And we'll have 2 or 3 more, I think it's 3 more seminars after that. So you can find information on those seminars at fishsounds.net/educate.js, where you can register for the future seminars. And then for this specific discussion, if you are watching this recording and are interested in contributing or have thoughts related to this special issue, you can email fishsoundscontact@gmail.com. And we'll be able to pass along the messages to our team and also connect you as these discussions move forward. And then as we sort of organize the thoughts at the end of this session, for those of you who were registered for this seminar on Zoom, we'll be able to email you using those emails. And so we can keep in touch that way, though, of course, you're also welcome to reach out to us directly as well. Any other final thoughts, Kieran, for the recording?
No, so I did put this slide on here, so I just changed to it now. But yeah, certainly. So email Fish Sounds, contact us any way you can. My email's on there if you want to send me one directly. For the route forwards on this, we'll put together kind of a rough outline of what we think maybe this conversation landed on with some themes within it so folks can see, if this fits or we need to change it around. We'll start an email list to kind of discuss this topic. And so as yeah, we'll send it out to everyone. We'll get everybody in the discussion, and then we'll start kind of going through these stages and let it evolve. And, kind of in terms of the timeline, we have quite a bit of time. So even if we go for the closest date, we have several months until our submission for a special issue would be due. And then there's many months on top of that till the papers are due. So we've got time to talk about this and develop something.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to Kieran for leading the discussion and all the wonderful input we've had so far. With that, I will stop the recording now.